The rain had been falling over Seattle since sunset, steady and cold, a thin gray sheet that blurred the harbor lights into smears of yellow and red. From the 11th floor, the city looked like it was breathing the fog rising from the streets in slow, damp waves. Inside Harborview Grace Medical Center, the night shift had settled into its usual rhythm. The fluorescent lights hummed softly, a high constant note behind the more urgent sounds. Monitors pulsed, ventilators sighed. Somewhere down the hall, a patient laughed too loudly at a late-night rerun. Then the tones hit. The overhead speaker cracked, then barked out a single word that snapped everyone upright. Trauma. In the emergency bay, the automatic doors yawned open and let in a rush of wet air. The ambulance backed in with a hiss of brakes. Red lights spun along the glossy floor. 2 paramedics shoved their gurney inside shoes, squeaking water dripping from their jackets. Male, mid-30s, stab wound to the abdomen, the lead medic shouted as they rolled forward. BP 80/40 dropping, heart rate 140, unresponsive but breathing on his own. The trauma team fell into motion. A nurse tore open a blood pressure cuff. Another spiked a bag of saline and hung it without looking, fingers moving on pure muscle memory. Someone pulled back the blanket and made a small sound at the sight of the wound, a dark blossom in the center of the man's t-shirt. In the middle of the chaos, the beeping monitor picked up speed, the high notes climbing like a warning. Dr. Cole Mercer slipped through the crowd and into the center of the bay as if the space had been made for him. He had not been in the emergency department 5 seconds, but everyone knew he was there. He carried that kind of gravity. "Talk to me," Cole said. The medic shot off the report again, shorter this time. Cole listened to eyes on the patient, his hands already moving. He pressed his gloved fingers around the wound, feeling the rigid abdomen beneath. The man's skin was clammy. His breath came in shallow bursts, the kind that sounded too wet. "Type and cross 4 units now," Cole said. 2 large-bore IVs. Get blood, not just fluids. Prep for the OR. A resident at his shoulder nodded, adrenaline bright in his face. "On it, Dr. Mercer." Cole leaned closer to the patient, the overhead light drawing hard lines across his features. There were silver threads near his temples that had not been there a few years ago. Sweat was already forming at the edge of his hairline, and the night had barely begun. "Hey, buddy," he said quietly, his voice dropping under the noise. "You picked a lousy evening for this. Stay with us, all right?" The man did not answer, but the monitor replied for him, the beep stumbling, then catching again. Beyond the trauma bay, the hospital stretched in a series of long, polished corridors, mostly empty at this hour. A floor buffer hummed somewhere, the smell of bleach faint under the stronger scent of antiseptic and coffee. On the roof, a different sound cut through the rain, low and rhythmic. Whoop, whoop, whoop. A medical helicopter skimmed over the water and swung toward the hospital rotors, chopping the mist. Its navigation lights flashed in red and white, reflecting off the wet landing pad. The downwash flattened the rain into a single hard curtain. Security watched from the stairwell window as it settled onto the roof. "Busy night," one of them muttered. "Full moon," the other replied, though the sky outside was nothing but cloud. Back in the trauma bay, the team worked around Cole with practiced speed. The patient's clothes had been cut away, the wound widened just enough to pack dressings around it. Blood pooled beneath the stretcher, thin and bright under the harsh lights. Pressure still dropping, a nurse called from the head of the bed. 70/30. Cole did not look up. "Keep pushing blood," he said. "Call upstairs. I want OR3 ready yesterday." The charge nurse had already picked up the phone, one finger jammed in the other ear to block the noise. She murmured into the receiver, her eyes on Cole the entire time. "Trauma to OR3, she said. Stat, Dr. Mercer's case." There was a weight to that last part. Across Harborview, Grace, the name still carried a charge of confidence. He had earned it over years of nights like this, nights when something messy and broken came through the doors and left hours later stitched together and improbably alive. Cole stepped back just long enough to strip off a blood-soaked gown and trade it for a clean one. His movements were quick, economical, betraying only the slightest tremor when he thought no one was looking. For a heartbeat, he squeezed his eyes shut, drew in a breath through his nose, and let it out slowly. The tremor stopped. "All right," he said, "let's move." They pushed the gurney out of the bay, the wheels rattling over the small metal threshold. Cole walked at the head, one hand still on the patient's shoulder as if to keep him from sliding away. The resident hustled beside him, clutching the chart, firing off lab values that blurred together in a string of numbers. Under the bright ceiling lights, the small procession became a familiar within the hospital, a kind of grim parade. Nurses stepped aside. A transporter froze against the wall with an empty wheelchair. A janitor pulled his mop bucket back out of the way. For a second, as they passed under a flickering panel, shadows broke across Cole's face. The lines there looked deeper, his eyes more hollow as if the years had been pushed forward all at once. Then the light steadied again, and the chief trauma surgeon was back, shoulder squared, stride unwavering. They reached the double doors to the operating wing, A scrub tech hit the foot pedal and the door swept open on a gust of cool, filtered air. "Or 3 is ready," someone called. Cole glanced up at the clock above the door. The red second hand slid past the 12. 12:09, he said under his breath. "Let's not make it 12:10. The doors closed behind them, cutting off the bright chaos of the emergency department. The beeping monitors faded into a dull echo, swallowed by the deeper quiet of the surgical floor and the rain still tapping at the windows far below. The night outside went on wet and dark as Harborview Grace braced itself for another hour under the lights. Or 3 glowed under its bank of bright lights, an island of white tile and stainless steel, waiting for something to happen. The room always smelled sharper than the rest of the hospital. Bleach and alcohol, a hint of burned dust from machines that had been running for years. Riley Quinn stood at the instrument table, a blue mask looped under her chin, her hair tucked away beneath a disposable cap. Her hands moved over the metal trays with slow, unhurried precision. Clamp, scissors, needle holder. Another clamp curved another straight. She did not look at the printed checklist taped to the side of the cart. She did not need to. From the doorway, a junior nurse paused and watched for a moment. The girl was new to nights still crisp in her brand-new Harborview scrubs. Her badge read Lopez Anita. Anita frowned a little. "How do you know where everything is without looking?" she asked. Her voice sounded too loud in the empty room. Riley did not startle. She finished placing a final retractor in its slot and only then glanced up. "I have set this table a lot of times," she said. "It stays in my hands." Her tone was quiet, so even that Anita had to lean closer to hear. There was no pride in it, no invitation for more questions, just a simple statement of fact. Anita stepped farther inside, drawn by a mix of curiosity and the need to fill silence. "Yeah, but I still have to read the list every time," she said. "If I skip one, my preceptor looks like she's going to pass out." Riley gave a small breath that might have been a laugh. "In some places," she said, "there is no list on the wall. You learn to see the table in your head." She turned back to the metal fingers, smoothing one of the drapes, and the conversation seemed to fall away before Anita could catch it. Some places Anita repeated, but the door out in the hall opened and a scrub tech wheeled in another stand and the moment was gone. Riley did not explain that in those other places, the light had been red instead of white, and the table had been a folding metal board set up in dirt or sand, and the sound outside had been gunfire instead of a floor buffer. Those details belonged to a life that did not exist in Harborview Grace. She adjusted her mask, then walked to the anesthesia cart to check the suction lines. Her hands tested the connections, then clicked the tubing into place. They were small hands, the nails cut short, the knuckles scarred in tiny pale arcs. If anyone had looked closely, they would have seen a longer mark that ran up from her wrist toward her forearm, an old wound turned to a silver ridge. No one ever looked that closely. Out in the corridor, voices approached in a loose cluster. The tempo was different from the emergency bay, less frantic, but still keyed up. The sound bounced off the painted walls and arrived as a blur before the words did. Anita moved toward the doorway and peered out. She could see Dr. Jason Kell coming around the corner. His hair flattened in a way that suggested he had just removed a cap and shoved it into his pocket. A stethoscope hung around his neck with 2 pens clipped to his badge. Beside him walked another resident, both of them talking quickly. Jason caught sight of Anita and Riley and altered course toward OR3. "Quinn," he said, nodding at Riley as he stepped inside. "Looks like you have the knives lined up already." His smile was quick and sharp. It did not quite reach his eyes. Riley glanced at him briefly, then lowered her gaze to the instruments again. "Room is ready," she said. "Good." Jason rocked back on his heels. "You ever get tired of being this prepared?" Anita gave a nervous laugh. "She was in here before we even got the call," she said. "It is kind of scary." Jason smirked. "Perfectionism is a disease," he said. "But I guess it is a useful one in here." He stepped closer to the table, eyes running over the rows of gleaming metal. "You know, Riley," he added, lowering his voice as if offering advice. "You are smart. Everybody knows that. If you spoke up more, took point, sometimes you could move up. Charge nurse, then maybe supervisor. You do not lead from the corner." Riley lifted her head slowly. Behind the mask, her face was hard to read, but her eyes were calm. "I am where I need to be," she said. "Doctor." There was no heat in the reply, no challenge. That seemed to bother Jason more than anger might have. He searched her face for a second longer, then shrugged. "Suit yourself," he said. "Mercer is getting the patient ready. We will be up in a minute. Try not to make us look bad by being omniscient." He left on the tail of his own joke, the second resident hurrying after him. Their footsteps faded toward the scrub room. Anita watched them go, then looked back at Riley. "I think he is trying to be nice," she said. Riley adjusted a tray by less than an inch. "He is trying to be something," she replied. The ceiling intercom clicked on. "Trauma case 2 OR3, a voice announced. All staff to stations." Riley slipped fully into her role then. She pulled her mask up, tied it behind her head, and positioned herself by the instrument table with her hands folded at waist height, palms turned slightly inward. The lights overhead intensified the surgical field, brightening with a soft electric hum. The doors banged open and the gurney rolled in. Cole walked alongside the patient, one hand still on the shoulder, his gaze already fixed on the blank draped belly that would soon be open. The anesthesiologist stepped around to take over the head of the bed. Nurses moved in a smooth chain, transferring lines, swapping monitors, adjusting tubes. Riley watched all of it, taking in the arrangement in one sweep. Position of the suction, height of the IV poles, angle of the overhead lights. She had done this so many times that the choreography lived in her muscles. She knew when to step in and when to be still. She knew when to breathe. Scalpel, Cole said. He had not even scrubbed yet, but the word came out as naturally as breath. He watched as the circulator nurse passed the instrument to Riley, and Riley laid it in his palm when he finally joined the sterile field. His hand brushed hers just for a heartbeat. His skin felt too warm. Big bleed, he asked the anesthesiologist without looking away from the patient. Looks that way, came the reply. Pressure is barely holding. Riley glanced at the monitor. Numbers glowed in green and red. 70/40, heart rate still high, oxygen dipping then climbing as they adjusted the ventilator. She did not speak. She counted each beep, letting the rhythm settle somewhere in the back of her mind. Her fingers hovered near the next instrument on the table, already aware of what Cole would ask for before he said it. The room narrowed until there was nothing but the man on the table, the ring of light over his body, and the quiet hum of machines waiting for their part in whatever came through that first cut. Outside, the rain kept falling against the windows of Harborview Grace, soft and relentless over the glass. The scrub room buzzed with the low sound of rushing water. On the other side of the glass, or three, had settled into a kind of charged stillness. Blue drapes covered the patient from chest to knees, leaving only a rectangle of pale skin exposed in the center. The overhead lights had narrowed into a bright circle that made the rest of the room feel dim by comparison. Riley stood at her post, eyes on the field. Dr. Cole Mercer finished scrubbing and backed into the room, hands held upright, droplets running down his forearms. He turned with a practiced spin so the circulating nurse could tie his gown. Gloved hands slid into place. The ritual seemed to straighten him like putting on armor. "Evening, everyone," he said. The mask muffled his voice, but the smile still sat in it. "Let us make this quick and clean." Jason Kell stepped up across from him, already gowned. His posture tried to mirror Cole's shoulders, back chin high. He looked almost like a younger version of the man across the table if you took away the gray hair and added just a little more nervous energy. "Midline laparotomy," Cole said. "We will get in control the bleeding, look for diaphragm involvement. This is not complicated, it is just messy." Jason nodded a little too sharply. "Yes, doctor." The anesthesiologist, Dr. Ganesh Rao, watched the monitors at the head of the bed. The patient's chest rose and fell in time with the ventilator, each cycle accompanied by a soft hiss. Lines of color moved across the screens in steady waves. Numbers glowed. "BP at 78/42, Rao said. "Heart rate still 130. I would like that stabilized, but we are not at the cliff yet." Cole lifted his eyes to Riley. "Scalpel," he said. Her hand closed around the instrument before the word had fully left his mouth. The metal felt cool even through the glove. She slapped the handle neatly into his waiting palm, watching the way his fingers closed around it. He looked down at the belly, took a breath, and made the first cut. The blade moved in a straight line from just below the sternum to above the navel. The skin parted with a small resistance, a faint drag of tissue. A thin sheet of blood followed, dark and smooth, welling up along the edges of the incision. A nurse dabbed with gauze. For a moment, the scene could have been any of 100 trauma laparotomies. "Deeper," Cole said. "Metz," Riley replied, already placing the delicate scissors in his hand. The layers opened one by one. Subcutaneous fat, fascia. A vague warmth rose from the wound, the inner heat of the body meeting the cooled air of the operating room. The smell changed, picking up a metallic note. Jason leaned in to suction his movements, careful, his eyes intent. Riley watched as Cole worked her gaze, tracking every motion. His technique was efficient, his hands' steady fingers resting lightly on instruments rather than choking up on them. He had done this for decades, and his body remembered the route even when his mind was a step ahead. The last layer before the peritoneum glistened slightly under the lights. "Retractor," Cole said. Riley placed it. He eased the edges back, creating space. The room seemed to contract around that small square of exposed tissue. "Here we go," he murmured. The peritoneum opened with a soft, wet sound. A small puff of heat rose up, carrying a denser wave of smell. There was a beat of nothing, just a faint seep of fluid, then a slow ooze of darker blood. Jason leaned closer. "Not bad," he said, too casual. "I expected more of a fountain." "Do not invite one," Cole replied. He extended his hand. Riley gave him a longer suction tip. The tip slid into the opening with a little resistance, then moved searching. Riley felt it before she could name it. A subtle shift in the temperature of the air around the wound, a new thickness to the blood as it pooled at the edges, a quiet that did not feel like calm. Her fingers ghosted over the row of clamps, pausing for a moment above one in particular. It was shorter than the others, with a slight curve and a blunt tip. Months ago, she had asked a tech to order it and then said nothing about why she wanted it. She did not take it yet. She let her hand fall back to neutral. Across the table, Jason frowned behind his mask. "There is a lot of fluid," he said. "Could be from the stomach." Cole shook his head. "Smell," he said. "That is not gastric. That is blood." He did not sound worried. Not yet. He changed angle, brought the light a little closer, and nodded to Riley. "Give me another retractor. Let us have a look at the diaphragm." Riley passed the tool. The muscles across her shoulders felt tight, but her hands remained relaxed. She tracked every suction sound, every change in the way the blood moved across the field. The pattern mattered. She knew that from rooms that had looked nothing like this one. Ganesh Rao cleared his throat. "BP just slid to 72/38, he said. "You have bought yourself less time, Dr. Mercer." Cole did a small adjustment with his wrists as if rebalancing. "Understood. We are going to make it count." He leaned in. The suction drew away a thin sheet of red, revealing the shimmering rise of the diaphragm toward the left. The cut in the muscle was small, more like a split than a gash, but everything around it was stained dark. "There you are," Cole said. "Right along the dome." Jason nodded eagerly. "So that is our window," he said. "Track the path, find the source, clip close." "That is the idea," Cole answered. Riley saw the angle of their vision. She also saw what they were not seeing. The blood was not boiling up through that small tear. It was coming from somewhere behind, washing forward like water over a stone. The color was slightly different, thicker. The small details lined themselves up in her head out of habit. She stayed quiet. It was not yet time to do anything else. Anita stood at the periphery of the room outside the sterile field, pressed slightly back against the counter. Her eyes were wider than they had been an hour ago. She tracked the monitors like they were subtitles to a story that moved too fast. The clock on the wall ticked second-hand, snapping from mark to mark. "BP is now 68/30, Rao said. "Heart rate 145. I am pushing more blood, but he's losing faster than I can give." There was a small hitch in his last word. Cole did not miss it, but he also did not look up. His focus tunneled down into the wound. "Open more space," he said. "We cannot fix what we cannot access." Jason adjusted the retractors. The edges of the incision pulled farther apart. Riley supplied more gauze, more suction, everything timed to each command. Her mind flicked through an old memory. Thrumming rotor blades overhead, a body on a table that was really the hood of a truck. Light from a single handheld lamp jerking with every movement. Blood so hot it steamed in the cold air, her fingers tracing the same pattern beneath shattered ribs, counting off landmarks in the dark. She shut the memory down before it could bloom. This room was not that one. The table under her hands was stainless steel, not metal warmed by a desert sun. Yet the principles were the same. Riley reached for the short curved clamp, her glove brushing the metal just long enough to know it would be there if she needed it. Cole's shoulders tightened. Riley saw a tiny change in the line of his upper back. His gloved hands moved a little faster. The suction whined at a higher pitch. Blood kept flooding into the field, thin at first, then a little thicker, then pooling in a way that did not fit the simple diagram of a straightforward case. "This is more than I like," Jason said, his voice thinner than before. "I cannot see the liver clearly. The spleen looks buried." "That is because we are filling the basement," Cole said, irritation threading into the words. "Stay with me. We will find the leak." He slipped the suction deeper toward the left side, probing. For a moment, a small area cleared, and Riley caught a fleeting glimpse of where the fluid was coming from. It was not obvious. It was not dramatic. It was a quiet, insistent seep from behind the curtain of bowel, from a place where light did not reach easily. Then the pool covered it again. "Clamp," Cole said, hand outstretched. Riley placed a standard vascular clamp in his palm. Under the lights of OR 3, the patient's abdomen rose and fell almost imperceptibly with each assisted breath. The machines kept their steady hum. The rain went on against the distant windows, a soft percussion behind the sharper sounds of suction and metal on metal. Pressure numbers on the monitor slid another fraction lower. No one in the room stopped moving. No one spoke about anything but the next instrument, the next angle, the next breath. The first sign that things were shifting came in sound, not sight. The suction started to whine. It had been a steady pull, a low mechanical slurp as it cleared small pools of blood and irrigation fluid from the open abdomen. Now the tone climbed thin and strained the way a vacuum sounds when it tries to drink more than it can handle. Riley heard it and felt a small knot tighten between her shoulder blades. Cole did not step back. He pressed the suction deeper, jaw set. eyes narrowed behind the fogging shield of his glasses. The tip moved along the left side of the cavity, searching for a funnel, a direction, any sign of a single clear source. More blood rushed in to replace whatever he cleared. Red filled the field, bright at first, then darker as it gathered. It climbed over the edges of retracted tissue and washed back toward the center. The small, clean surfaces they had created disappeared under it. "Turn up the suction," Jason said. The scrub tech adjusted the dial. The whine sharpened. A thin spray flickered off the tip when it caught air for a second, then disappeared again beneath the surface. At the head of the table, Rao watched the numbers fall. "Pressure is 62/30, he said. The calm in his voice had a crack in it now. "Heart rate 150. I am pushing more units. He is not responding." Cole kept working. "Another lap pad," he said. "Pack the upper quadrant. I want to see under there." Riley placed a folded pad into his hand. He stuffed it into the space near the diaphragm and pressed down. For a moment, the blood around his fingers slowed, held in place by the pressure. Then it found another path, slipping around his knuckles and pouring down along the curve of bowel. Anita swallowed hard. From where she stood, it looked like the table was slowly taking on water. The smell in the room had thickened. The metallic tang of blood sat heavy in the filtered air, mixed with the sterile scent of chlorhexidine and the faint plastic of the drapes. Riley could taste it at the back of her throat every time she inhaled. 58/28, Rao said. Cole changed tactics. He pulled the pad out, flung it toward the discard basin, and tried to sweep structures aside with his hand. The motion was more forceful than before, less measured. Bowel shifted, then slid back. The suction gurgled. He cursed under his breath. "Retract harder," he said. "I cannot see through a curtain, Jason." Jason pulled back on the retractor until his own fingers shook. "Yes, sir," he said. Riley stepped in with a fresh suction catheter, swapping it out with the old one while keeping the field as clear as she could. The tubing vibrated in her gloved hand. She watched the way the blood moved, how it seemed to well from a deep pocket, rather than erupt from a visible tear. This was not a severed main trunk. This was a compromised branch buried behind the wall of tissue. She watched the rhythm of it, the timing between pulses measuring in her head. 40 seconds. 30. The intervals shortened as the patient's heart fought to keep up. "Clamp," Cole said again. Riley handed him another standard vascular clamp. He dipped it out of sight, working almost blind now, guided more by feel than vision. The metal clicked on something, caught a bit of tissue, then slid free. Jason tried to suction in time with him, but their motions collided. "Move with me," Cole snapped. "Do not fight me." "Sorry," Jason answered. His breath came fast. A thin line of sweat had crept down from under his cap, tracing the side of his face. 48/20, Rao said. "We are close to losing waveform." He looked at the blood bag hanging from the IV pole. It was almost empty. Another weighted spikes ready, but he knew they were pouring fluid into a hole they had not found. "Get the next unit up," he told the nurse. The nurse's hands fumbled with the tubing. The plastic slipped for a second. She muttered an apology under her breath and corrected it. The mistake cost them 3 heartbeats. Riley saw the delay, saw the numbers answer. The pressure line dipped again. Her own heart rate climbed, but her breathing stayed steady. Inhale through the nose, slow exhale, a habit learned somewhere far from this room in spaces where panic had been a luxury no one could afford. Cole shifted his stance. His elbows were closer to his ribs, now hands pressed deeper into the cavity. The light reflected off the clear shield in front of his eyes, which had fogged at the edges. He blinked hard, then tilted his head slightly to bring a fresh patch of lens into line. "More light," he said. The overhead fixture adjusted, but the glare only bounced off the pooled blood. Dr. Jason said, his voice tight. "Maybe we should widen the incision. Get more exposure. We can bring in a scope, get a camera in the back." "There is no time for toys," Cole shot back. "We are not rearranging the room. We are fixing a hole." He swept again. Blood surged. Lap pads went in, came out soaked and heavy, the basin filled with red cloth. Rao's voice cut through. 42/18, heart rate 162. He is going into a spiral here. There was a brief shifting at the wall as someone went to pull the crash cart closer, the rubber wheels squeaking against the tile. The sound did not belong in an active surgery. It belonged in the moments after. Anita flinched when she heard it. Cole froze for half a second. The noise reached him even through the tunnel of his focus. "Do not move that yet," he barked without looking up. "We are not done." He bent closer, shoulders hunched, the muscles in his neck standing out. The gown clung to his back with sweat. His hands worked faster, not cleaner. Retractors shifted. Instruments clicked. The rhythm that usually lived in his movements had been replaced by something sharper and less certain. Riley recognized the change. She had seen it before in other operators. There was a point where skill met the edge of its own experience and found nothing solid to step onto. She watched his fingers search, probing behind the bowel, following the path of the unseen vessel by intuition and anatomy maps in his head. His intuition was good. Tonight it was not enough. Suctions, he said, all of them. Give me as many as you can. Riley and Jason both obliged. 2 suction tips worked in tandem, now the sound rising to a ragged howl. Blood flowed around them in dark sheets. They cleared only small windows at a time, glimpses into a red room. There, just for a heartbeat, Riley saw the pattern again. A particular way the fluid eddied from a low point under the pancreas. It was a sign she knew by another name tied to a long cold night and a man on a metal stretcher who had either lived or died based on the speed of her hands. She tightened her grip on the short curved clamp. Rao drew in a breath. 38/15, he said. I am losing a line. We are about to have no pressure. The monitor backed him up. The green numbers bled lower with each passing second, the waveform shrinking each peak shorter than the last. The pulse oximeter tone stuttered. Jason's suction hand trembled. We are not seeing it, he said, a high note creeping into his voice. I cannot even identify the branches anymore. It is all just a mess. Cole did not answer immediately. His hands kept moving, but something in him had shifted. The certainty that usually wrapped his words had thinned. He swallowed the sound small and dry. Spread that further, he said, even though there was nowhere left to spread. His gloves touched something solid. He tried to feel along it, searching for the familiar throbbing of an artery. The sensation was muffled through layers of tissue and fluid. All the subtle cues he relied on had been drowned. 28/12, Rao said, we are at the edge. There was silence from Cole. He stopped moving. The suction buzzed against his stationary fingers, sucking air. The sudden noise of empty suction made Anita jump. She stared at Cole, then at the wound, her own lungs forgetting their rhythm for a moment. Cole lifted his head. Behind the shield, his eyes looked older than they had when the night started. The lines at the corners seemed deeper, his pupils a touch too wide. He looked at the pool of blood that refused to be cleared, then at the monitor, then at his own hand. A thin drop of sweat fell from his chin and hit the blue drape. I cannot see it, he said softly. No one answered. He tried again, louder. I cannot see the source, he said. I am not getting control. Every move is making it worse. The admission hung in the filtered air. Rao's hand tightened on the edge of the anesthesia cart. The nurse at his side glanced toward the wall where the crash cart waited, one hand hovering over the defibrillator paddles. Jason stared at Cole as if he had misheard. Doctor, he said, we can call for another attending. Someone from vascular. Someone else can scrub in. Cole shook his head, once a small jerky motion. There is no time, he said. By the time they scrub, we will have no blood to move. He looked around the field from Jason to the retractors, to the pile of soaked lap pads in the basin, then back to the monitor. The steady beep had become fragile. It sounded like something that could stop between one breath and the next. His shoulders sagged a fraction. I have lost control of this case, he said. The words were flat, almost clinical, but his voice rasped at the edges. In that instant, the authority that had filled the room when he arrived seemed to drain out of him and collect somewhere on the floor with the blood. The room reacted by going very, very still. Anita forgot to shift her weight, forgot to swallow. The scrub tech did not reach for another instrument. The nurse at the medication cart froze with a syringe half drawn. Only the machines kept moving. Only the numbers kept sliding. 26/10, 24/8. Rao's gaze flicked to Riley just for a second, then back to the monitors. Jason swallowed and stepped back half a pace, his eyes darting between Cole's face and the open wound. The sound of the suction faded as Riley thumbed it off for a moment, letting the blood rise. She watched it, the way it filled the space, the way the color and movement pointed not to the obvious, but to where the real problem hid. She drew in a breath through her mask. The elastic straps pulled against the back of her head. The short, curved clamp rested between her fingers, balanced ready. The patient's heartbeat stuttered in the speakers, thin and fast, a bird trapped in a box. No one spoke, no one moved. The air over the table felt as heavy as water. The quiet broke on a voice no one expected. I know where it is. Riley's words were soft. They did not rise above the machines so much as slide between the sounds and find their own space. Heads turned toward her as if pulled. Cole looked up from the blood that would not stop. His eyes found hers across the field. What did you say? He asked. Riley did not flinch. I know where the bleed is, she said. It is not on the surface. It is not the main trunk. It is a branch low and to the left behind the bowel near the anterior aspect of the pancreatic border. Her tone was level, almost detached, like she was reading from a chart instead of describing the inside of a dying man. Jason stared at her. You cannot see that from there, he said. You are at the table. You do not have a direct view. You would need a camera. Riley kept her gaze on Cole. I'm not seeing it, she said. I am reading the pattern. The wording was odd enough that even Rao glanced away from the monitors. Cole's eyes flicked briefly to the wound, then back to Riley. Sweat glistened at his temples under the cap. His gloves were red to the wrists. We have been looking at the pattern, he said. There is blood everywhere. Riley's hand tightened around the short, curved clamp. The metal rested against her palm familiar. Her heart hit harder against her ribs, but her breathing stayed slow. The retroperitoneal space is filling from one side, she said, not both. The flow is low pressure but constant. It is not the aorta. It is not the vena cava. The angle of entry and the way it is pooling say lateral branch. Small caliber, high enough that you are not seeing an obvious tear, low enough that it is hiding behind the bowel. Jason shook his head. That is guessing, he said. Riley's eyes shifted to him, then returned to Cole. It is not guessing, she said. I have seen this before. She did not add that she had seen it through dust and smoke with nothing but a headlamp and a flashlight held by a shaking private while the ground shook from something exploding 2 ridges away. Those details did not belong here. Rao cleared his throat, drawing their attention back to the monitors. 20/8, he said. If you have something, you need to act on it now. Cole looked back down at the field. Blood continued to seep up from below, covering what little anatomy he could still make out. He could feel his own pulse in his fingertips out of sync with the faint throbbing in the tissue. Riley took a step closer to the sterile field, stopping just short of the line. If you let me go in, she said, I can clamp it. Silence followed. It seemed impossible that it could be quiet with the suction, the ventilator, the monitors all working, but for a few heartbeats, everyone heard only the choice hanging in the room. Jason spoke first. You are a recovery nurse, he said. You cannot just reach into an open abdomen and start hunting vessels. That is not how this works. Riley did not even look at him this time. Dr. Mercer, she said, directing every word at Cole. If you keep sweeping blind, he bleeds out. There is no more margin. You admitted you have lost the field. Let me take it. If I'm wrong, we are in the same place we are now. If I am right, he lives. Her voice stayed quiet, but something in it had changed. It had lost its softness. There was a core in it that none of them had heard before. Cole's jaw clenched. He looked at the monitor. The numbers wavered near 0. The waveform on the arterial line was almost flat. One more drop and the whole line would vanish. He looked at the wound, a red well with no bottom. His gaze came back to Riley. Her eyes were steady. For the first time since he had known her, he saw not just competence, but something harder to name, something like the habit of standing in bad places and making decisions no one else would make. What are you basing this on? He asked. Riley's fingers flexed around the clamp. Field work, she said. Too many nights with this exact sign. Same angle, same pattern. I am not guessing. The words field work sat in the air with a weight of their own. Rao looked up fully from the anesthesia cart. Anita's brow furrowed, a question forming that did not have room to be voiced. 16/6, Rao said quickly, his voice thinner now. If someone is going to do something different, that time is now. The crash cart wheels squeaked again as a tech nudged it closer almost involuntarily. Cole closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. The mask hit his mouth, but not the way his cheeks tightened. Then he stepped back from the table. The movement made a hollow sound in Riley's chest. She watched as he took one careful step, then another. His hands held away from his body so as not to break sterility. Though there was nothing left for them to do where they had been. He looked at her, the overhead light catching on the fogged edges of his shield. Take it, he said. Quinn, it is yours. Jason blinked as if he had been slapped. Dr. Mercer, he protested, you cannot be serious. She is not credentialed to operate. We cannot just hand her the case. Cole's eyes cut to him. We do not have a case if we have no patient, he said. Right now, she is the only one in this room who is sure of where to go. The words fell like a stamp. No one argued further. Riley stepped forward, crossing the invisible line she had stayed behind for years. The change felt small in distance and enormous in everything else. She extended her hands. Cole placed them where his had been guiding without speaking. The heat rising from the open abdomen soaked into her gloves. She could feel the slight tremor of the patient's weakening heartbeat through her fingertips. Retract for her, Cole said to Jason. His voice was softer now, but it still carried command. Give her every millimeter of space. Jason obeyed, jaw tight. He pulled back on the retractor, opening the view as much as the blood would allow. Riley looked down. From her angle, it was chaos. Red, slick surfaces. Glimpses of structures she knew by shape and color. Shadows where the light did not reach. It would have been enough to make anyone feel lost if they depended only on what their eyes could see. She did not. Her hands went where her eyes could not. She slid her left hand in deeper fingers, tracing the curve of bowel, the edge of the pancreas, the firm line of the spine beneath everything else. The tissue was slippery. She moved gently, not to bruise what was not yet broken. The blood was warmer here, close to the source. She felt it slide over her wrist, sticky alive. It soaked into the cuff of her glove. More suction, she said quietly. Riley did not raise her voice, but everyone heard. Jason adjusted, guided by her movements, now pulling fluid away from wherever her fingers were trying to work. She closed her eyes. Her breathing became the only sound she heard for a moment apart from the faint fluttering of the patient's heart. The room fell away, leaving only the map in her head. Under her fingertips, landmarks came and went. Ligament, vessel, hollow space. She worked her way along the path she had already drawn in her mind when she had watched the blood flow a few minutes earlier. Left side, low behind the pancreas near the anterior border. Her right hand still held the short, curved clamp. The instrument felt heavier with each passing second, as if the choice it represented had its own weight. BP is 12 over nothing, Rouse said the last word almost a whisper. We are losing the trace. Riley's fingers brushed against something that fought back. A small rhythmic push against her skin, hurried and uneven like the flutter of a trapped bird. Blood pulsed there in a way that did not match the rest of the field. She knew that feel. The exact way it hammered when a smaller branch had been cut at an odd angle, not all the way through, leaking instead of spraying. Found you, she breathed too low for anyone to hear. She adjusted her hand position, curving her fingers around the tiny segment of vessel the way she might catch a fragile piece of glass. The artery was deep, half hidden behind a fold of tissue. She could not see its full length. She did not need to. Hold suction where it is, she said. Do not chase. Jason froze his hand in place. The tip of the catheter hovered just beyond her fingers, clearing just enough fluid to keep the area from disappearing. Riley brought the curved clamp in with her right hand, advancing it slowly along her index finger, as if the finger were a guide rail. The tips were open only a little. Too much, and she would crush what she needed to control. Too little, and she would miss it. Time narrowed. Her world shrank to the pinch of metal between her fingers and the pulse beneath them beating faster, then weaker, then faster again. Now, Rouse said almost to himself. Riley closed the clamp. The click of metal on metal was quiet. It cut through the air anyway. For a breath, nothing seemed to happen. The blood around her knuckles still shimmered red. The suction hummed. The monitors sang their thin alarm. Then the flow changed. The constant ooze that had been filling the retroperitoneal space slowed. The pool at the bottom of the field stopped rising. The suction began to pull more air, the whine of it dropping a note as it no longer fought an endless river. Rao's eyes flew to the arterial line. The waveform which had been collapsing flickered. For a terrified second it went almost flat. Then a small peak appeared. Another, slightly taller. 12 over 5, he said, not daring to believe it. Another heartbeat. The peaks climbed. 16 over 8. Riley held her position and did not move the clamp even a fraction. Her fingers began to ache from the tension. She ignored it. The color in the field shifted. Instead of fresh bright red boiling up from below, what remained was darker, more stagnant, the blood that was already there with nothing new feeding it. 22 over 10, Rouse said, his voice rising. Come on, come on. The pulse tone on the monitor, which had been a frenetic, high-pitched chirp, slowed by a fraction. The room listened to each beep as if it were an answer. Cole stepped back and closer, careful not to crowd her. What did you catch? He asked. 3rd degree branch, Riley said, still not moving her eyes from the field. Low off the anterior aspect, it was partially sheared, enough to leak everything without giving you a visible spray. Jason let out a sound that might have been a laugh if it had not cracked in the middle. You did that blind, he said. You could not see anything. Riley finally opened her eyes fully. They were clear, not wide. Not blind, she said, just without a camera. She shifted her hand enough for Cole to see the clamp's placement. Even with the suction, it took a moment for him to orient. When he did, his gaze snapped back to her. How did you even think to look there? He asked. Riley shrugged one shoulder slightly. It is where it was, she said. Rouse spoke again, the numbers coming faster now. 32 over 16. Heart rate down to 130. He is still critical, but we have a curve again. The line on the monitor agreed. The peaks were still smaller than they should have been, but they were no longer disappearing. They had shape. They had direction. Around the table, the paralysis that had held the staff in place broke. The scrub tech moved again, rearranging instruments. Anita let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. Someone pushed the crash cart a little back from the door. Riley kept her grip on the clamp, waiting until she felt the rhythm beneath her fingers settle into something less frantic. Only then did she ease back enough to let Cole see the field clearly. We will need to secure this properly, she said. Suture it, not just clamp, but the leak is controlled. Cole nodded. Keep your hand where it is, he said. Talk me through your approach. He did not say it out of skepticism now. He said it because he understood that whatever map lived in her head was one he did not yet have, and tonight it had kept a man from bleeding out on his table. Riley adjusted her stance, the ache in her shoulders fading under the slow return of order to the room. The beeping monitors began to sound less like a countdown and more like a heartbeat again. The room moved again, but the rhythm had changed. Riley held the clamp steady while Cole slid into a new position, the suction going quiet for a moment as he focused on the small patch of space she had carved out of the chaos. "All right," he said. "Fine work. Let us make it permanent." He reached for a delicate needle holder. Riley passed it to him without looking up. Her attention stayed on the way the vessel pulsed under the clamp, fast and thin, like something that had been terrified and was trying to calm. "Stay just proximal to the jaws," she said softly. "There is not much room. If you crowd the branch, it will tear." Cole did not question the instruction. He set his stitches where she told him to, hands careful as movements small. Jason watched from across the field, his eyes following each pass of the needle. "Clamp off for a second," Cole said when the first suture was in place. Riley hesitated for the briefest moment, then eased the pressure just enough to test. A small seep appeared, then stopped as the stitch caught. They repeated the sequence, building a tiny wall that held back an entire river. Rao narrated the changing numbers as if calling out landmarks. 42/20, he said. 50/26. Heart rate coming down to 120. The green line on the monitor rose a little higher with each beat. The red alarm at the corner of the screen faded to a steady glow instead of a flashing accusation. When the vessel was finally secured and the clamp came away clean, Riley let herself lean back a fraction. Her shoulders burned from the stillness. She did not roll them out. The rest of the wound still needed attention. Cole moved through the remaining inspection with more care than speed. He checked the liver, the spleen, the bowel, making sure there were no other surprises hiding in shadowed corners. Each time he asked for suction, he got a clearer field than before. "No more active bleeding," he said at last. "We still have a sick man, but he is not pouring himself out on my floor anymore." Rao exhaled audibly. "Pressure is up to 68/34, he said. "Trending the right way. I can work with this." They began packing, irrigating, restoring order to the anatomy. The red that had covered everything diluted slowly to pink, then to clear. Lap pads went in and came out only damp. Gauze stacks that had been disappearing now stayed on the table. Jason helped close his hands, more careful, his earlier sharpness worn down into something quieter. He watched the line of sutures travel up the midline, neat as a zipper. "Nice save," he muttered almost to himself. Riley heard him but did not answer. Her focus had narrowed to the last few tasks. Count the sponges, count the instruments, check again, nothing missing, no sounds out of place. By the time the last layer of skin was approximated and dressed, the numbers on the monitor had plateaued. "BP 90/50, Rao said. "Heart rate down to 110. He will need a lot of support in the ICU, but he is still here." Cole stepped back from the table. The front of his gown was a map of fading stains. He looked older, but there was a line of stubborn relief in his eyes. "Good work, everyone," he said. He meant it for the room. His gaze, just for a heartbeat, settled on Riley. She lowered her eyes, already moving to disassemble her tray. The gurney rolled out with the patient heading toward the elevator that would take him up to intensive care. A nurse walked alongside, one hand resting on the rail as if the weight of that touch alone could anchor the man to the world. The doors to OR3 closed behind them. The room sagged, the tension draining out of the air. Someone turned the main lights down to a softer level. The harsh pool over the table dimmed. Anita let out a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a shaky sigh. "I thought we were about to call it," she said. "For a second, I really thought." She cut herself off. Saying it out loud felt too close to making it real. The scrub tech started clearing instruments. Metal clinked together as he dropped them into a basin. The sound was mundane, almost comforting. Cole stripped off his gloves. They came away with a wet snap falling into the trash. He tugged at the ties of his gown and pulled the fabric off his shoulders, revealing a set of blue scrubs damp with sweat at the collar and down the spine. He walked over to the sink in the corner and turned on the water. For a few moments he simply let it run over his hands, as if he needed to rinse off more than blood. Behind him, Riley checked her count one last time, eyes moving over the now quiet table. "Everything accounted for," she said lightly to the scrub tech. He nodded, still a little wide-eyed. "Yeah," he said, "everything." Cole dried his hands on a towel. When he turned, his gaze went back to Riley. "How did you know he asked to look there?" Riley met his eyes. There was no triumph in her expression, only a trace of fatigue around the corners. "The way the pocket filled," she said. "And the pressure wave. It was not central, it was sliding off to the left. The flow did not match a torn cava or aorta. It was softer." "That is textbook?" Jason said, coming closer, curiosity tugging at him. "What you did was not textbook. You felt your way to a branch you could not even see." Riley set a clamp down with deliberate care before answering. "Sometimes you do not have a textbook," she said. "You have a patient and a pair of hands. You learn to trust what the hands are telling you." Jason opened his mouth to ask something more, then stopped. The question sat there anyway, hanging between them. Cole watched her for another long second. He looked like he wanted to push to peel back the layer she had just finally lifted for a moment. Instead, he nodded once. "I'm not too proud to say you saved that case," he said quietly. Riley's reply was simple. "He is still alive," she said. "That is what matters." The intercom crackled overhead before anyone could say anything else. "Attention all units," the operator's voice said. "Security reports an incoming helicopter on the main roof. Not medevac. Repeat, not medevac. All access points to be monitored." The words dropped into the room like a cold stone. Riley felt at first in her stomach a hollow twist that had nothing to do with hunger. The rotors had been a constant part of her nights for years, both here and elsewhere. She knew the difference in their songs. The air carried a new vibration, faint but growing. Even through the closed doors and thick walls, the low chop of blades reached them. It was heavier than the quick swing of the hospital's usual air ambulances. Cole glanced up at the speaker, then at the clock. "We are not expecting another flight," he said. Jason frowned. "Might be a transfer from a ship," he offered. "Naval training exercise." Riley knew better. The angle of the sound, the weight of it were wrong. The hospital's own choppers had a lighter touch, more whir than thud. This one thudded. Anita shifted closer to the wall as though the building itself could explain. "Security said not medevac," she said. "So, who lands on a hospital roof in the middle of the night if they are not bringing someone in?" No one answered. On the roof, the helicopter settled onto the pad with a gust of wind that rattled the stairwell windows. Red and white navigation lights spun along the wet surface. The machine was dark gray, its profile bulkier than the sleek air ambulances Harborview usually saw. Hospital security officers braced in the rain as the side door slid open. Figures in uniform stepped down onto the slick concrete, the fabric of their jackets weighted with something more than rainwater. One of the officers held up a hand as the strangers approached. "This is a secured medical facility," he shouted over the engine's idle. "What is your purpose here?" The woman at the front of the group produced a leather case and flipped it open in a single smooth motion. Even from a few feet away, the security guard could see the embossed seal that ranked the photo. "Captain Nora Hayes, United States Navy," she said. Her voice carried without needing to shout. "We are here for a patient who just came out of surgery, and for someone on your staff." The guard's brows knit. "We have protocols," he began. "You cannot just walk in without going through administration." "We have our own protocols," Nora replied. "You can escort us, or you can be in the way. Your choice." There was something in her tone that was not unkind, merely final. The guard hesitated, then stepped aside. Inside in the OR suite corridor, Riley rinsed her hands even though she did not strictly need to. The cool water ran over skin that had warmed too much. She rubbed at a spot on her wrist where the glove had cut in, leaving a faint groove. She could still feel the ghost of that tiny branch beating against her fingertips. The rotor noise grew louder for a moment, then settled into a steady background hum as the helicopter powered down. Riley turned off the tap and listened. The building seemed to be listening with her. Cole had gone to dictate his operative note, leaving Jason and the tech to finish tidying the room. Anita busied herself replacing linen, folding the clean sheets with more precision than they required. The corridor door at the far end opened. The sound of new footsteps approached, measured and firm. They echoed differently on the tile, like someone used to walking where they were not questioned. Rouse stepped out of the adjacent OR just as the group came into view. He stopped short. Captain Nora Hayes walked at the front. She wore a dark uniform under a rain-spattered jacket, the collar turned down neatly despite the weather. Her hair was pulled back in a regulation knot. Her face was composed the kind of calm that is practiced, not natural. Behind her moved two other uniformed personnel and one man in a suit, his badge clipped to his belt. "Can I help you?" Rao asked. Nora's gaze flicked to his ID badge, read his name, and moved on. Her eyes skimmed the door plaques, landing briefly on the one marked OR3. "We are looking for the surgical team that just handled an emergent abdominal trauma," she said. "Male, mid-30s, status critical." "That would be us," Rao said slowly. "He is on his way to ICU. Who are you exactly, and why is the Navy on my floor in the middle of the night?" Her attention slid past him and into the open doorway of OR3 where Riley was checking the rest of the instrument trays. When Nora saw her, she stopped. For a long second, the rest of the hall seemed to narrow. The background noises, the distant paging, the rattle of a cart, faded down. Nora's focus locked on the small woman in faded blue scrubs, her hair tucked under a disposable cap, her hands still resting lightly on stainless steel. "Night Watch 6, Nora said. The name was not spoken loudly, but it hit the air like a dropped tray. Rao blinked. Jason, who had been stacking basins, froze with one in his hands. Riley went very still. Her fingers curled slightly against the edge of the table. She did not turn yet. Nora took a few steps into the OR, stopping just short of the threshold where her shoes would cross into the sterile zone. "We have been looking for you," she said. Her voice had softened for a long time. Riley lifted her head. The cap and mask hid the lower half of her face, but her eyes in that moment could not hide anything. Recognition flickered there. Not surprise. Something older, heavier, like the fatigue of a long postponed conversation arriving anyway. I think you have the wrong person, Riley said quietly. The lie sat thinly between them. Nora did not smile. She drew the leather case from her jacket again and opened it, showing the seal to the room, but her words were meant for Riley. Captain Nora Hayes, Special Operations Medical Command, she said. We tracked an unidentified clamp signature through your telemetry system tonight. A very specific one. Deep retroperitoneal branch control applied blind, matching a profile used in exactly one unit. She let the case close with a soft snap. Combat Surgical Team Night Watch, she finished. Call sign 6. Anita's gaze darted from Nora to Riley back again. Night Watch, she repeated the word clumsy on her tongue. Like from the news stories, they keep hiding that kind of night watch. The man in the suit cleared his throat. There are no official records of any such unit, he said. Nora did not bother to argue with him. She kept her eyes on Riley. Operation Ashfall, she said. Hostile fire, compromised extraction. Entire medical detachment listed KIA. One unconfirmed survivor missing, presumed dead. That was 5 years ago. We closed that file the day your dog tags showed up without you. Jason's mouth went dry. You were listed as killed in action, he said barely above a whisper, staring at Riley. Riley's hand shifted unconsciously toward her locker in the staff room, beyond the far wall where a scratched metal tag lay under a spare set of scrubs. She did not confirm, she did not deny. Silence became its own kind of answer. The silence stretched so long that the hum of the vents grew loud. Riley did not look away from Nora. The muscles along her jaw had gone tight, a small pulse beating just under her ear. You have the wrong person, she repeated, but there was no conviction in it now. Nora took another step forward. The soles of her boots whispered against the tile. You clamped a third-order branch in a blind field, she said. You did it by feel in under 30 seconds. That pattern has been documented exactly 3 times in the last 10 years. All 3 in theater. All 3 by one medic. Night Watch 6. Jason found his voice first. Night Watch was real, he said almost to himself. I thought it was just rumor, a ghost story for surgeons. The man in the suit gave him a flat look. There are no official acknowledgments of that designation, he said. Anything you think you know about it is classified or fictional. Anita let out a shaky laugh that died halfway. Then why is the Navy standing in our hallway? She asked, saying it out loud. No one answered her. Nora kept her focus on Riley. Her expression did not soften, but something in it shifted like a door closing on formality. We monitored your surgery in real time, she said. We had to. The patient on that table is tied to an active operation. When your clamp signature showed up on the telemetry, my command flagged it. There are not many people who can do what you did tonight. There is only one whose profile matches exactly. Riley's eyes flicked to the clock on the wall, then back. You tracked a clamp, she said, through a hospital feed. Nora nodded once. We track anything that matches Night Watch markers, she said. Has never happened in a civilian OR before. Cole stepped forward slightly. He had been standing off to the side, shoulders slack, letting the wave of revelation wash over him along with everyone else. Hold on, he said. Someone explain to me in terms I can understand what you think my nurse is. The man in the suit spoke before Nora could answer. There was a unit, he said. A mobile surgical team deployed with special operations forces. No fixed base. No recorded footprint. They went where they were sent off the books. They stabilized people the rest of us never knew had been injured. When one of their missions went bad, the official record listed the team as killed in action. His gaze went back to Riley. Except clearly that was not completely accurate. Nora did not contradict him. She watched Riley instead, measuring. In Ashfall, Nora said quietly, your team was cut off for 19 hours. You took casualties from 2 sides plus civilians. Your last transmission before your comms died was that you were triaging 3 lives per minute with a single set of hands. Images that Riley had tried to keep in tidy boxes broke their seals. A canyon choked with smoke, the ground shuddering under incoming fire. Blood finding its way into every crease of skin no matter how often she rinsed. Faces lined up on stretchers on the ground leaning against shattered walls, all of them looking at her. You are next. You are next. You are next. Her throat closed around words that had nothing to do with the room she stood in now. You read that in a report, she said. You were not there. Nora tilted her head slightly. No, she said. I was not. I was on a ship receiving your victims after they had already survived you. She let the sentence sit. Cole looked at Riley again as if she would suddenly rearrange into someone else in front of his eyes. The quiet woman who had stocked supplies and set trays now carried lines of history he had never imagined. You have been here for 3 years, he said slowly. Taking the worst shifts, keeping your head down. You never said a word. Riley gave a small lift of the shoulder. I came here to work, she said. Not to give lectures about something that is not supposed to exist. Jason felt heat creep up the back of his neck. He remembered every time he had told her she needed to be louder, every throwaway comment about leadership and ambition. He swallowed. "You let me talk to you like that," he said, "knowing who you were." "You talked to the person in front of you," Riley said. "That is all you saw." There was no accusation in it, but it landed with more weight than anger would have. Rao cleared his throat. "Whatever she used to be," he said, nodding at Nora. "Right now she is my nurse, and I have a critical post-op patient in the ICU who needs rest, not Marines at his door." "Sailors," Nora corrected automatically, "and we are not here to disrupt his care, quite the opposite." She turned slightly, including Cole and Rao in her next words. "The man you pulled back from the edge tonight is an asset tied to an ongoing operation," she said. "That is why the agency is here. We had a contingency to secure him if he made it off the table. We did not expect to find our missing medic standing over him." The man in the suit nodded. "Until we debrief him and assess the situation, we maintain a presence on this floor," he said. "Standard protocol." Cole bristled at the idea of anyone calling his patient an asset. He folded his arms across his chest. "This is a hospital," he said, "not a forward operating base. You can stand in the hall all night, but my staff treats him like any other man on a ventilator. You do not give orders in my ICU." Nora regarded him for a moment. There was a flicker of respect in the way her mouth curved. "Doctor," she said, "I have no interest in running your unit. I only ask that you understand the stakes are wider than the chart in his file." She looked back to Riley. "And that your presence here changes those stakes." Riley shook her head. "I left," she said. "Ashfall ended that life. I came home such as it is. I work nights, I stock linen, I set clamps, that is enough." Nora took a breath as if she were choosing her next words carefully. "Your operational file was pulled back into active review the moment we realized you might still be alive," she said. "I have orders to bring you in for evaluation. Technically, you are still under recall." Anita looked between them, not understanding all of it but sensing the gravity. "So you want to take her," she said quietly. "Just like that. Out of here." "Not as a prisoner," Nora replied. "As a soldier who never received a proper discharge." Riley's hands curled into loose fists at her sides. "I signed my discharge," she said. "I packed my bag. I walked out of that last base." Nora's eyes softened just enough to be visible. "You walked out under a provisional leave order so you could get clear of the blast radius in your head," she said. "The paperwork on our end never caught up. You disappeared." "We chalked it up to someone who had given enough and wanted to vanish." Riley felt Anita's eyes on her, felt Jason's, felt Cole's. The OR walls seemed suddenly too close. "I am working," she said. "I have patients, schedules, a life here." Nora nodded. "I can see that," she said. "And I am not here to put you in cuffs. I am here because my command wants to reopen a conversation that was cut short by a hard landing and a bad night. They sent me because I actually respect what you did." Her gaze slid to the door of OR3, then back. "And what you still do." Rao checked his watch, then the hallway. "If this conversation is going to pull people off the floor, it needs to happen somewhere that is not outside an open OR," he said. "We have other cases tonight." Nora inclined her head. "Fair point," she said. "We will not clog your arteries." She addressed Riley one last time before stepping back. "I will be waiting in your administrator's conference room in 15 minutes, she said, "with my orders and with a full explanation of what we are asking. You can walk away after that conversation if you choose. At least then you will know what you are walking from." She turned and left the OR doorway, her team falling in around her. Their footsteps moved down the corridor, then faded. The moment they were gone, the air seemed to rush back in. Anita let out a low whistle. "So," she said slowly, "our quiet night nurse is some kind of ghost medic the government pretends does not exist. That is what just happened." Rao rubbed his forehead. "Everyone goes back to work," he said. "Nothing changes for the next 10 minutes. We still have a hospital to run." He gave Riley a look that held more questions than time would allow. "You all right?" he asked. Riley nodded once. "I will finish here," she said. "Then I will go listen to what she has to say." Cole stood by the wall, his hands on his hips. He watched her for a long moment as if recalibrating who he was talking to. "You should not go in there alone," he said. Riley met his gaze. "I have been alone in worse rooms," she answered. The way she said it left no room for argument. He still tried. "Even so," he said, "you have a right to someone in your corner. If they are dragging you back into something, they can do it with your attending present." Riley studied him, weighing. "Bien, Ayen." "Thank you," she said finally. "But this is between their file and mine. You cannot fix what they broke." Jason stayed quiet while the others filtered out. When it was just him and Riley and the clink of metal in the basin, he cleared his throat. "I'm sorry," he said. She did not look up. "For what?" she asked. "For all the times I treated you like you were less," he said. "Or like I was doing you a favor by telling you how to be. I had no idea who you were." She placed a needle holder into the tray, the motion precise as always. You knew I set a good table, she said. That was enough. It was not, he said. I should have known better without needing a uniform to tell me. She paused, then her hand resting on the edge of the metal. Then know better, she said, for the next person you underestimate. His face flushed. I am trying, he said. I know, she replied. Word of the encounter spread through Harborview faster than any official memo. By the time Riley stripped off her cap and changed into a dry scrub top, 2 orderlies in the supply room were whispering about a Navy helicopter on the roof. A respiratory therapist on break swore she had seen armed personnel in the stairwell. In the cafeteria, a tech told a radiology clerk that the quiet nurse from nights was some kind of special forces doctor who had come back from the dead. Security officers traded guesses near the bank of monitors, watching new feeds that showed the gray helicopter parked on the pad, its rotors still. They are not unloading anyone, one guard said. They are just sitting there. They are not here for a patient anymore, his partner replied. They are here for her. In the break room outside the ICU, 2 nurses stood over a pot of burned coffee, speaking in low tones. I heard she walked out of a valley with an entire unit behind her, one said. I heard she was supposed to be buried in Arlington, the other replied. Instead, she is stalking gauze in Seattle. When Riley stepped into the corridor on her way to the administrator's office, conversations quieted as she passed. No one stopped her, no one saluted. They just watched, seeing her with new eyes, unsure yet how to fit everything they had just learned around the familiar silhouette of her pushing a cart or checking a drip. She kept her head level, her steps even. The badge at her chest still read Quinn-R, Nurse Recovery. The plastic felt no heavier than it had an hour ago. Inside, something had shifted, but her hands were the same. The administrator's conference room sat on the 9th floor, tucked behind a bank of offices and a copy machine that had been jamming for years. At night, it felt like a leftover space used mostly for early morning briefings and late evening apologies. Riley stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping in. The lights were on, full casting a pale glow over the long table, and the framed photographs of past hospital directors that lined one wall. A coffee pot sat untouched in the corner, still half full from a meeting earlier in the day. Through the window, Seattle spread out in wet reflections, the harbor lights broken by ripples of rain on the glass. At the end of the table, Dr. Marion Strand, the hospital's chief administrator, sat with her hands folded over a legal pad. Her blazer was hanging on the back of her chair, and the lines around her mouth had deepened over the course of the night. Beside her sat the man in the suit, his badge clipped to his belt, his tie only slightly loosened. Captain Nora Hayes took a seat across from them, posture, straight jacket unzipped but still immaculate. Cole was there too, in fresh scrubs hair damp from a quick wash at the sink. He sat a little back from the table as if ready to either join in or leave depending on where the conversation went. Riley took the empty chair at the near side, her hands folded in her lap. The room seemed too quiet after the chorus of monitors and suction. Dr. Strand cleared her throat. Nurse Quinn, she said, thank you for coming in on short notice. I know you have had a long night. Riley nodded once. I am still on shift, she said. I have some time before the next round. Strand glanced at Nora, then at the man in the suit. This is Captain Hayes, she said, who you have met. And this is Mr. Carver with Defense Liaison. They have information regarding your prior service that I will admit I was not fully aware of until the last hour. Carver folded his hands together on the table. Ms. Quinn, he began. Riley is fine, she said. He accepted the correction with a brief nod. Riley, he said, records list you as former enlisted medical personnel attached to a classified unit. Status killed in action. The fact that you are sitting in front of me suggests that status may be inaccurate. Her eyes flicked to Nora before coming back to him. That status worked for everyone for a long time, she said. It kept people from asking questions. Cole shifted in his chair. She has been here for 3 years, he said. On my staff, working nights, taking whatever you throw at her. Whatever you listed in your files, she has been very much alive in this hospital. Nora's gaze moved between them, taking in the small currents under the words. No one is accusing you of deception on our end, she said to Riley. When paperwork goes through 4 different commands in 18 hours during a bad situation, things get broken, including status updates. Carver tapped a finger once against the table. The bottom line, he said, is that your name was never processed through a formal separation. Your recall remained technically active. That means, in simple terms, you are still on the books. Riley studied the wood grain in front of her. You are saying I never got to quit, she said. Nora leaned forward slightly. I am saying the conversation about quitting never finished, she replied. Ashfall ended with explosions and a blackout. You walked away from something that should have killed you. You did not check back in. I checked into a hospital, Riley said. Eventually, someone at the VA told me my file was sensitive and to stop asking questions. Strand's fingers tensed around her pen. Our HR department ran her background, she said to Carver. She cleared credentialing. If there was an active recall, it was buried deep enough that civilian systems did not see it. Carver nodded. I am not here to accuse your institution of misconduct, Doctor, he said. I am here because a dormant asset just lit up in a very particular way, and my office cannot ignore that. Cole's jaw hardened. She is not an asset, he said. She is a nurse who just saved a man that you care very much about. Nora's eyes met his. That is why I am here in person instead of sending a notice, she said. Respectfully, Doctor, please understand. You are thinking in terms of your OR. My command is looking at an entire board full of moving pieces, and she is one of them whether she likes it or not. Riley sat back a fraction. What do you want? She asked. Carver flipped open a thin folder. There were not many pages inside. Most of the text was blacked out. Officially, he said, we want you to report to a review board. Psychological, physical, tactical readiness. They will decide whether to reactivate you, retire you, or retain you in some advisory capacity. Strand exhaled sharply. You cannot just walk in and take one of my staff, she said. We are short as it is. She has a contract, patients who rely on her. There is no intention to drag her out of here tonight, Nora said. Her use of the word drag made Riley's stomach tighten. Unofficially, Nora continued. I came to see if you even want this conversation. If you tell me you are done, I will write that in my report. They might still send someone with more stripes than me, but at least there will be a record from someone who has actually seen you in a room that is not on fire. Riley stared past Nora at the rain streaking down the glass. There were 19 hours, she said quietly, in that valley. The radios died, the satellite link cut out. They stopped calling us. Her voice stayed steady, but the room felt the way it thinned. I had a watch, she went on. It cracked in the first blast, but the second hand still worked. I counted every time I started on somebody new. 3 lives a minute was not a boast. It was math. Who got a tourniquet, who got a clamp, who got morphine and a hand to hold because I knew they were not going to make it up the hill. Her fingers pressed against the edge of the table until the knuckles blanched. When it was over, she said I was tired of math. No one interrupted her. I came here, she said. I work nights. I clean up after difficult cases. I listen to the ones who wake up confused. I go home while the sun is coming up and no one is shooting at me on the way to my car. That is the life I built because your paperwork said I was dead. Nora did not look away. I read your field notes from Ashfall, she said quietly. What little of them made it through. I also read the list of names that would not have made it back without you. You are not a mistake on a form to me. Carver shifted in his seat, uncomfortable with the tilt of the conversation. You have skills that are rare, he said. Skills that took time, money, and lives to develop. We are not in the habit of discarding them. Cole's mouth tightened. She just demonstrated those skills in a way that kept your operation from losing a critical asset, he said. Right here. In my OR. In your own words, there is no other medic who could have done what she did tonight. So perhaps the question is not what you can get from her, but how you plan to pay the debt you already owe. Strand gave him a warning look, but she did not disagree. Carver bristled slightly. The United States government is not in her debt, he said. Then I am, Cole replied. Personally, professionally, take your pick. Nora dragged the conversation back before the lines hardened too far. Riley, she said, are you willing to sit for a formal evaluation at some point in the near future? Not a recall, not a deployment, just an honest assessment with people who know what they are looking for, so that this can stop being a ghost entry in a system and start being something you have a say in. Riley considered. In her head, she saw a tent backlit by fire, the flap lifting as a different officer walked in with a clipboard and too many questions. She remembered how every answer she gave then seemed to be twisted into justification for sending her back out again. She looked at Nora now and saw someone who had at least bothered to stand in the same hallway to look in the same OR. Not tonight, Riley said. Nora nodded. I would not ask you to, she said. But Riley added, I am willing to read what you want me to sign before I say no. A corner of Nora's mouth moved not quite a smile. That is all right, she said. I can work with no as long as it is informed. Carver seemed ready to protest. Nora lifted a hand slightly, and he subsided unhappy but quiet. Strand closed her legal pad. For the record, she said Harborview Grace has no intention of releasing Nurse Quinn from her current position without her consent. If there is a legal conflict between your paperwork and our contracts, our counsel will sort through it. In the meantime, she has patience. Carver did not like it, but he recognized a line when someone drew it with that much finality. This is not finished, he said. Strand's expression did not change. I did not expect it to be, she said. It is 2 a.m. Nothing important ever gets finished at 2 a.m. Nora stood. For now, she said, my team will maintain security outside your ICU, only as many bodies as necessary. No disruption to your routines. We need your patient to recover as much as you do. She turned back to Riley. If you change your mind about talking to us before we knock again, she said. My number is on the card in that folder. Riley looked down. A plain white card sat tucked into the manila, printed with Nora's name in a secure line. It seemed too small to carry so much weight. I will keep it, Riley said. Good, Nora replied. They filed out one by one. Carver left first, checking his phone before the door even closed behind him. Strand lingered only long enough to squeeze the bridge of her nose and mutter something about calling legal in the morning. Then it was just Cole and Riley at the long table. He let out a breath and rubbed a hand over his face. I have seen families get that kind of treatment, he said. Gold Star parents next of kin. I have never seen them have that conversation with the person in the chair. Riley pushed the folder away slightly. I was not supposed to be the person in the chair, she said. They had a headstone picked out for me. He studied her quietly. Why Knights, he asked. Out of everything you could have done, if you were trying to disappear, there are easier ways than signing up for endless blood and fluorescent lights. Riley thought about the question. Knights are quiet, she said. Mostly. People say less, they pretend less. I know how to work in the dark. It feels honest. He nodded slowly. You know, he said, I told myself you were just a nurse who liked being prepared, that you were some kind of obsessive about your tray. That was the story that made sense to me. You were not wrong, she said. I was incomplete, he answered. There is more to you than what I allowed myself to see. Riley rose from her chair. I am still the person who likes a ready tray, she said. Whatever you call me, that is not changing. He almost smiled. I will take that, he said. They left the conference room together, parting ways at the elevator. Cole headed toward the dictation room, his shoulders a little straighter than before. Riley turned toward the ICU. The intensive care unit was quiet in the way busy places are when the work is mostly done at bedsides instead of at central stations. Monitors glowed above each bed, the green and red numbers like tiny cityscapes in the dark. The nurses spoke in low voices, their movements fluid and practiced. Riley checked the board for the room number. The man from OR3 was in a private bay at the end of the hall, curtains drawn. A security officer stood near the door, hands clasped in front of him. His uniform was hospital issue, but his posture had stiffened since the helicopter landed. He is asleep, the guard said as she approached. Ventilated, vitals are stable. I know, Riley said. I saw the transport. I just want to look in on him. The guard stepped aside. She slipped through the curtain. Inside the room was washed in a soft blue from the monitor screens. The man lay on his back, tubes and lines branching out from his body like a strange root system. The ventilator whooshed with each artificial breath, lifting his chest and letting it fall. His face looked older away from the chaos of the trauma bay. Gray threaded through his hair. Stubble shadowed his jaw. There were deep lines at the corners of his eyes, the kind carved by years outdoors and too many early mornings. Riley moved to the bedside and checked the infusion pumps by habit. Vasopressors, sedatives, fluids, all running within the parameters Rao had called out. Her gaze drifted to his left shoulder. Near the edge of the blanket, a tattoo peeked out, black ink soft from age shaped like a fox's head inside a broken circle. The design tugged at something buried. She had seen that symbol on patches once in a place where the dust never quite settled. Her fingers rested lightly on the bed rail. You are a stubborn one, she murmured. You picked a deep branch to nick. The ventilator answered with another sigh. She stood there for a minute longer, listening to the machines do their work. The beeps in this room sounded different than in the OR. Less frantic, more like a reminder that life for the moment was still being tallied. As she turned to leave, the man's hand twitched. It was a small movement, barely there, but the tape at his wrist pulled against the IV line. Riley stopped. His fingers relaxed again, settling back into stillness. The sedation was deep. He would not wake any time soon. The movement might have been nothing more than a reflex, a random misfire of muscles. She watched his face for another breath. Rest, she said quietly. You are not on that table anymore. Outside, the rain tapped against the ICU windows, softer now, like fingertips. The lights of the harbor blurred and reformed with each drop. Riley stepped back into the hallway. The guard nodded at her curiosity in his eyes that he did not voice. She walked away, the sound of her shoes muted on the polished floor, her badge swinging lightly against her chest. The man from OR3 woke on a gray morning, 3 days after the night his blood had tried to leave him. Light from the ICU windows slipped past the blinds in thin stripes. The monitors at his bedside drew their slow green hills and red numbers. A nurse adjusted a drip and checked his pupils, then left him to the quiet hum of machines. He lay still, feeling out his own body. There was pain, a deep drag along his midline, wrapped tight in bandages. His throat felt raw from the tube that had been there and was now gone. His tongue tasted like metal and plastic. He turned his head a fraction and saw the ventilator sitting in standby, a broad white machine that had decided he could breathe alone again. Someone had taped a small photo to its side, a generic beach scene from some store calendar. The water was so flat it did not look real. He was alive. The door opened. Riley stepped in with a chart and a quiet step. She had swapped her night scrubs for a fresh set, but a faint reddish line still marked the skin at her wrist, where a glove had dug in too long. Her hair was pulled back, as always, her badge clipped to her collar. She checked the monitor, then his IV lines, then the wound dressing. Her hands were gentle but efficient, the same motion she had performed 1,000 times on strangers whose names she barely remembered. "Good morning," she said. "Mr. Park Wright." His voice came out rough. "That is me," he said. She glanced at him, assessing. "Pain level," she asked. 0 to 10. "Depends where you poke," he rasped. Her mouth turned slightly at the edge. "I will write that down as a 7, she said. "I can get you something once I'm done looking at your incision." He watched her as she loosened the top edge of the dressing, her fingers bracing the skin so the pull on the tape did not drag across the wound. Her touch was light and certain, never hovering, never rushed. He frowned. "You were in the room," he said. "In the lights." Riley lifted her head a little. "In surgery," she said. "Yeah." His brow knit as he chased the fragment of memory. "There was shouting," he went on. "And that, feeling like I was falling out the bottom of myself. Then someone put a hand inside me, not grabbing, just knowing where to go." The words came out slow, broken around breaths. The effort cost him, but he pushed through it. "I remember that more than the pain," he said. "That hand, like it had been there before." Riley finished checking the dressing and smoothed the tape back down. "You had a lot of blood loss," she said. "Sometimes the brain holds on to odd pieces when it is low on oxygen." He shifted his gaze from her face to her fingers. "They are the same," he said. Riley went still. "The same as what she asked." He swallowed. The movement pulled at his sutures, and he winced, but his eyes did not leave her hands. "The valley," he said. "Dust and smoke. Night that felt wrong. We called it something else in the brief, but none of us use that word. We just say the valley." He searched her face for a flicker. She kept her expression even, but the air in the room thickened. "You were there," he said slowly. "Ashfall. 3rd Platoon Forward Ridge. They told us the medic who stayed behind to hold the line on the wounded died with the last blast. That the body could not be recovered." Riley's fingers curled around the edge of the bed rail. "I was assigned to a medical detachment," she said. "Night watch." "Night Watch 6, he said. The title came out on a breath like something he had not expected to use again. He looked at her more closely now, peeling back the years in his mind. The hair was shorter, the face a little thinner, but the eyes were the same color, the same kind of still. His gaze dropped to her wrist again, to the pale scar that ran along the bone. "There was a boy," he said. "Young enough that he still had a baby photo in his helmet. Shrapnel caught him under the ribs. They told me he was gone before I hit the ground. I woke up with your hands in my chest instead of the dirt. You kept saying you would not lose him. I thought you meant me." Riley remembered the boy. The photo stuck inside the helmet liner with tape that would not hold in the heat. She remembered hands reaching for her from all sides, all of them wanting the same thing. Times she did not have enough. Her throat pulled tight. "I meant both," she said quietly. Park's eyes shone with something that was not just pain. "They told us a Night Watch 6 did not make it out," he said. "They marched us into a tent and gave us names on a list. Yours was on the wall. It was easier to believe that than to imagine you walking around somewhere doing this." He nodded slightly toward the fluorescent light, the bland walls, the noise of another monitor beeping outside. "I chose this," Riley said. He smiled, a small crooked thing. "You chose not to stay dead," he said. "I am selfish enough to be glad they were wrong about you." She did not know what to do with the warmth under the words. It pressed against something in her chest that had stayed locked for a long time. "You were on the table tonight," she said, "bleeding into the same place from almost the same angle. That seems like bad luck." "Or a bad habit," he replied. The corner of her mouth moved. "Try not to make it a pattern," she said. His fingers shifted toward hers on the bed rail. The tape held him back. The effort drained him, but he made it. "You pulled me off a battlefield twice," he said. "First with a kit you carried on your back, then with a clamp in some civilian hospital that still smells like war once you get under the skin. I do not know if there is a word for that." "You do not owe me anything," she said. He shook his head as far as the pillow would allow. "I do not owe you," he said. "I get to be alive. That is not a debt. It is a gift that you handed out when you could have kept more of yourself." She looked away out at the pale light through the blinds. The harbor was hidden behind low clouds, but she knew it was there. "I did not do it alone," she said. "There were always others in the room, or in the valley." His breathing slowed. The monitors held steady. Fatigue pulled at his eyelids. "You can say that if it helps you sleep," he murmured. I know what I saw. A few minutes later, he slipped back toward sedation, his body still recovering from the insult of being opened and put back together. His hand relaxed, the lines on his face eased. Riley stood there a moment longer, listening to the gentle beep of the monitor and the soft hiss of oxygen. Then she left the room. In the hallway, a man in a dark uniform waited. Not hospital security. His shoulders had a different set to them, his shoes polished enough that the floor caught a faint reflection. The silver star on his collar caught the light when he turned. "Captain Quinn," he said. Riley stopped. She recognized the rank even if the name was new. Brigadier General. The kind of person who usually lived in pictures on walls, not in hospital corridors. "I am not a captain," she said. He came closer, offering his hand. "Marcus Shaw," he said. "Special Operations Command Medical. I have heard that line from a lot of people with your history. It never holds up under paperwork." She did not take his hand right away. When she did, it was a brief, firm grip, more formality than welcome. "You read a file," she said. "I read a lot of files," he answered. "Most of them are tidy. Yours is not." They stepped a little aside so nurses could pass. The ICU went on about its business around them, but the space between them felt oddly separate. "I wanted to see you with my own eyes," Shaw said. "Not just as a name with a red line through it on a report." Riley watched a respiratory therapist adjust a ventilator down the hall, then looked back at him. "You have seen me," she said. "You can update your report." He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "You are direct," he said. "Good. I will be direct too." He gestured toward a small alcove with a window that looked over the parking lot. They walked to it. Outside, the early light had brightened to a flat sheet over the city. Cars moved in slow lines, their headlights still on in the drizzle. "I do not have a lot of time," Shaw said. "Neither do you, I imagine." So here's the shape of it. Headquarters is spinning up a new doctrine for forward surgical support. We have tools now that we did not have during Ashfall, but we still do not have enough people who know how to make decisions in the kind of chaos you have already survived. He watched her face as he spoke. "We want you," he said, "not just back in uniform. At the table. Designing how the next generation does not die the way yours almost did. Chief medical advisor, curriculum authority, budget to build what you wish you had had." Riley stared out at the parking lot. "You are offering me an office," she said. "I am offering you command," he corrected, "and the resources to change more than one room at a time." "I change a lot of rooms here," she said. "They just do not salivate over doctrines when I walk in." Shaw followed her gaze. "There is a world beyond these walls," he said. "You know that better than most. It has not gotten calmer since you left. You could help steady it, or at least make sure the people who walk into its worst parts are not doing it blind." She thought about Nora's folder, the blacked-out lines, about the valley and the watch with its cracked face, about the man sleeping now with tubes in his arms and a fox tattoo on his shoulder. How much, she asked. His brow creased. "Excuse me," he said. "You are offering me a job," she said. "Jobs come with numbers. How much?" He named a salary. It was more than she had ever seen on a pay stub, more than this hospital would pay her in several years of nights. He added phrases like secure housing option research facility access classified briefings. The numbers hung in the air, abstract and clean. She flexed her hand, feeling the faint ache along the scar at her wrist. "The money is nice," she said. "The rooms would be quieter. The coffee would be better. You would not have to hold a clamp yourself very often," he said. "You could teach others to do it the way you do." Riley turned to face him fully. "General," she said, "when Ashfall ended, I walked out of a canyon where every sound felt sharp enough to cut skin. I had a bag, a discharge that may or may not have counted, and more ghosts than I had pockets. I came here, and for the first time in a long time, the only thing I had to listen to at night was a beeping monitor and a floor buffer. That felt like mercy." He listened without interruption. "Out there," she said, jerking her chin towards some point beyond the window, "you want me to think about maps and schedules and how many sets of hands I can train before the next shot goes off. In here, I can stand next to a bed and know that the only war I'm fighting is between a body and itself." She let the words breathe. "I'm not running away from the world," she said. "I am choosing where I touch it." Shaw considered her for a long time. The lines around his mouth deepened. "You think this is smaller," he said. "I think it is cleaner," she replied. He shook his head slightly. "Nothing about an ICU at 3 a.m. is clean," he said. "But I understand what you're saying." He fell quiet for a moment, eyes traveling over the unit. A nurse adjusted a drip. A family member slept in a chair, chin on chest. Somewhere a monitor alarmed briefly and was silenced. "When you were written up after Ashfall," he said, "one of the comments in the margin was that you prioritized the living over the plan. Someone meant that as a criticism. I never read it that way." She almost smiled. "Plans do not bleed," she said. He smiled back this time with a hint of real warmth. "No," he said, "they do not." The smile faded. "I am going to tell my people you declined," he said. They will not be happy. They will send someone else eventually, maybe with more pressure, maybe with a softer pitch. I cannot promise they will leave you alone." She took that in without flinching. "You are telling me this, so I am not surprised when they knock again," she said. "I am telling you this," he said, "because you have earned honesty at the very least." He straightened the general back in full. "Whatever uniform you wear," he said, "or do not wear, you are still Night Watch 6 to some of us. That will not change because you decided to trade your dessert for rain." He lifted his hand in a crisp salute. It was the kind of salute reserved for people who ranked above him. He held it until she gave him a small nod in return. No hand over her brow, just the slight inclination of someone who accepts respect but does not absorb it. He dropped his hand. "You know where I stand," he said. "If you ever decide this ward is too quiet for you." "It is not," she replied. He gave a short laugh. "I suspected as much," he said. Then he walked away, the metal on his collar catching the ICU's low light as he went. Riley remained by the window for a while after he left, watching the drizzle streak down the glass. In the parking lot below, a nurse in a bright jacket hurried to her car, head ducked against the rain. An ambulance pulled up to the bay lights, flashing blue and red against the concrete. She pressed her hand lightly against the cool pane. Her reflection looked back at her faint over the city. Her badge still read Nurse Recovery. Her hands still remembered every branch they had ever clamped. A week later, the helicopter was gone, but the echo of its rotors had never quite left the building. Life at Harborview, Grace moved on. The way hospitals do. New traumas rolled in. Old patients went home or upstairs or nowhere at all. Shifts started and ended and blurred. Something underneath all of it had shifted. In the cafeteria, conversations dropped a notch whenever Riley walked in. Not out of fear, out of the carefulness people reserve for places where something important might be said without warning. A few weeks earlier, no one had looked up when she took her bowl of oatmeal to the corner table. Now eyes lifted tracked her for a second, then looked away again as if staring would break whatever quiet let her work. One morning as she finished her coffee, Anita slid onto the chair across from her without asking. "Do you mind?" Anita said. Riley looked at the empty chair, then back at her. "It is still a table," she said, "not a checkpoint." Anita let out a soft breath that might have been a laugh. "People keep acting like you are going to vanish if they blink," she said. "Figured if I was going to be awkward, might as well do it up close." Riley stirred what was left in her cup. "I am still on the schedule," she said. "That seems like a pretty solid anchor." Anita studied her for a moment. "When they said night watch in the OR, she said I thought that was some kind of code word. I went home and tried to look it up. Nothing. Just rumors and forums and a few lines in articles that look like someone scrubbed them." Riley did not help her fill in the blanks. "Some things are meant to stay between the people who were there," she said. Anita nodded slowly. "Fair enough," she said. "For what it is worth, I was wrong about you. I thought you were just weird, too quiet, too intense about clamps. I said some stupid things." "We have all said stupid things," Riley replied. "This place runs on them some nights." Anita shifted in her seat. "I'm trying to talk less and listen more," she said. "I figured you would approve of that." Riley's eyes softened. "I approve of anything that keeps people alive," she said. Later that week, the hospital director called a mandatory staff meeting in the largest lecture hall, the seats filled with white coats and scrub tops, techs in polos and clerks in cardigans. The air smelled of coffee and the faint mint of the cleaning fluid they used on the seats. Riley took a spot in the back row, leaning against the wall. Cole sat a few rows down, arms folded. Jason slid in beside him, looking like he wanted to take notes and could not decide what to write. Dr. Strand stepped up to the podium. "You all know why I called this," she said. "And if you do not, you will by the time we are done." There were a few scattered chuckles. They faded quickly. Strand looked out over the room, then down at the page in front of her. "Last week," she said, "our institution hosted an unplanned collaboration between civilian trauma care and certain less public branches of the military. The details of that collaboration are classified. What is not classified is what it exposed about us." She did not raise her voice, but it carried. "We watched a senior surgeon admit he had lost control of a case. We watched a nurse step forward, identify a problem no one else could see, and solve it with a level of technical skill that is frankly rare in any setting. We watched the rest of us freeze." A rustle moved through the room. Cole's jaw tightened, but he did not look away. Strand continued. "We are not here to indulge in hero stories," she said. "We are here to change how we behave. Effective today, we are implementing a new trauma training standard in this hospital. It is already on your email. It will be in your evaluations. You will hear about it enough that you will get tired of the name." She clicked to the first slide. Night Watch Protocol. 2 points appeared under it in simple black font. "Listen to the quietest voice in the room. Zero wasted motion in trauma." "This is not a branding exercise," Strand said. It is a reminder. Expertise does not always shout. Authority is not always the person at the head of the table. If someone has data, you will hear them. If someone is moving like they know what they are doing, you will watch. If you are the one moving, you will strip away everything that is not necessary and keep only what works. She paused to let that settle. We will be running cross-departmental drills based on these principles, she went on. Nursing, surgery, anesthesia, emergency. Titles will matter less than performance. You will be evaluated on whether you listen, not just whether you speak. In the back, Riley stood very still. Strand's gaze found her. Some of you may already know this, she said, but it bears saying out loud. Nurse Riley Quinn was once part of a unit that functioned under conditions this building will hopefully never see. That is her story, not mine to tell. What she did here is ours to learn from. Heads turned. Riley felt the collective weight of it and kept her eyes on the slide. She is not a mascot, Strand said. She is not a legend in residence. She is a member of the staff. Treat her like one. Learn what you can from anyone who has walked through worse and stayed to work. The meeting moved on to logistics. Drill schedules, simulation labs, modules that would need to be completed. People started typing notes into their phones. The tension in the room shifted from unease to a kind of focused anticipation. Afterward, as the crowd spilled into the hallway, fragments of conversation floated up. They are really calling it Night Watch. I thought that was some secret thing. If it teaches Mercer to breathe before he starts yelling, I am in. Jason caught up with Riley as she headed toward the stairwell. You know they named a protocol after your old ghost unit, he said. I noticed, she said. He hesitated. I signed up to help with the drills, he said. From the ground up, no special privileges. Figured it was time I learned to shut up and watch hands as much as I watch monitors. Her eyes met his. That sounds like a good use of your energy, she said. He blew out a breath. Maybe you could look over some of the scenarios they are writing, he added. Make sure they are not turning it into some action movie. Keep it true. Riley thought about men screaming under bad lighting about the smell of burned dust, about the way those memories did not fit into tidy simulated rooms. I can look, she said. If I say no to something, you listen. Yes, he replied, no argument. That night the OR felt different. The lights were the same. The tile was the same. The hum of the vents and the beep of the machines had not changed. The difference lived in the way people moved. Anita and another nurse worked a crash cart in a corner, walking through checks without talking much. They pointed instead of babbling, each gesture clear. 2 residents stood at a whiteboard sketching out an approach to a hypothetical bleed. One of them started to dominate the conversation, then stopped. Glanced at the other and gestured for her to speak instead. Riley stood at her usual spot by the instrument table in OR 2, setting her layout for the next case. Clamp, scissors, needle holders, retractors. Her hands moved with their accustomed certainty. Anita stepped into the doorway and watched for a moment, then came closer. Could you show me, she said. Riley did not pause. What am I showing you, she asked. How you think about this, Anita said, waving a hand gently over the tray. Not just where things go, how you picture the procedure in your head. Riley set the last clamp down and considered. What do you see right now, she asked. Metal, Anita said, and a lot of ways to make a mess. Riley picked up a pair of forceps and set them aside. This is not metal, she said. It is a sentence. Anita blinked. A sentence, she repeated. Riley nodded. Every instrument is a word, she said. They mean nothing just lying here. When the surgeon starts, they are telling a story. Opening conflict resolution. Every time I hand something over, I am placing the next word. If I do it right, there are no stutters, no wasted phrases. Anita looked at the tray again. The rows seemed less like a pile and more like a sequence. So, when you stand here quiet, she said slowly, you are still speaking. Riley looked at her. Yes, she said. Later in the small break room near the ORs, someone had tacked a new piece of metal onto the wall beside the schedule board. It was a bronze plaque, heavy, the letters cut deep enough to cast shadows in the fluorescent light. People gathered around it between cases, reading silently, in honor of Riley Quinn. Night Watch 6. The nurse who chose the ground to protect the skies. Never mistake silence for weakness. There was no ribbon cutting, no speech. Someone must have approved it higher up, signed a form, ordered the metal. By the time Riley saw it, it was already part of the wall. She stood in front of it, alone for a minute, the muffled sounds of the OR leaking through the door behind her. Her own name looked strange in bronze. It felt like it belonged more on a laundry tag than on a plaque. She traced the edge of the metal with a fingertip, feeling the cool ridge. Cole stepped into the room and stopped when he saw her. They did not ask me for input, he said, but if they had, I would not have changed a word. She let her hand fall back to her side. It is a lot of metal for someone who still clocks in, she said. You have earned worse decorations, he replied. A beeper went off in the hall. A voice on the intercom called for a trauma team to the emergency bay. The sounds reached them like a familiar song. Riley looked away from the plaque. I have a table to set, she said. She walked past Cole, past the board with its neat rows of names and times. As she stepped into the hallway, a group of nurses and techs coming the other way moved aside. For a second as she passed, they all straightened. No applause, no words, just a subtle stillness, the kind of attention people give when something important walks by. Then they went on with their work. In OR2. The lights came up. Riley took her place at the instrument table. The room smelled of antiseptic and warm plastic. Her hand settled over the rows of metal. Outside, the rain had started again, soft at first, then steadier, tapping against the long windows of Harborview Grace. In the distance, a helicopter crossed the sky, its rotors a faint thrum under the weather. Inside, a monitor began to beep in a regular, expectant rhythm. Riley listened to the sound, to the rustle of gowns and the soft shuffle of shoes. She picked up the first instrument of the night and felt its weight settle into her palm. Ready, she said. The word was quiet, but everyone in the room heard it. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.